If the memorabilia behind him didn't tip off to what he does, I don't know what to tell you. Ralph Sheheen is with me. He is an all-timer in motorsports broadcasting, and we are going to document his intrepid life. It's very adventurous. He's done a whole lot of things in this sport, and he's done a lot from motocross to NASCAR to Indy 500 to sprint car to everything, basically. And we're not only going to look at his career, but we're going to look at his life as well as a dad and have a lot of fun here on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel and Fox Sports Radio. Ralph, our schedules have aligned. I'm excited to have you on. Thanks for being here.
I couldn't believe it when I hit the link button. You actually just like, oh my God, we're actually going to do this. I think you and I have been trying to make this happen since beginning of summer.
Yes. Well, you've been busy. You've been in Australia, you've been in Wales and other places as well. And as we get this conversation started, you're somebody who obviously is an adrenaline junkie. You have to be in the line of work you are. But as much as that's a part of your DNA, where are you most laid back when it comes to your life?
Outside the house in the backyard where the pool is, we have an outdoor living space. It's about 850 square feet. It's pretty good sized. It's got a cooking area, but it's also got a big couch with an outdoor fireplace and a TV over the fireplace. And I can fall asleep on that couch with anything going on. It could be summer, it could be winter. It doesn't matter. Here in the Carolinas, we actually have 4 seasons, but winter is really only 2, January and February. And with a fire going out there and with a heater and a big blanket on, man, I can sleep real good out there. So that's probably the one spot where if I really wanted to just go flat, that's the spot.
I would think, in being that you are from the Carolinas, I went to college in the Carolinas, and I know that in where you are, there's a lot of lakes nearby you, and you're a boater.
One right up there.
Yeah, right by your house, right? So to get into a headspace that isn't work, what does being on the boat do for you? In a way, as you said, when you're outside and you're falling asleep in just sort of in your backyard and having that moment, but that distraction that boating gives Ralph Sheheen.
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily a boat or a wave runner or whatever the particular toy, for lack of a better way of putting it, instrument is. I think it's the lifestyle that comes with being accessible to the lake. We live here with Lake Norman, which is a big lake. It's 550 miles of shoreline. It's a dammed up river, the Catawba River. I live in Mooresville, North Carolina, just north of Charlotte. We have 3 lakes in this town, this being the biggest, and they dammed it up for a nuclear power plant, I guess back in the late 60s, early 70s. And with it came a bunch of lakefront property, which we're right across the street from it. So we have the lake access and that ability to go spend a day out on the water, doing whatever you're doing, being with your friends. You know, that's a big part of it, right? Family and friends. It's not just what you're doing, but who you're doing it with that brings that relaxation, that moment that we're all searching for. And to be able to come home, go in the backyard, cook up some burgers, hang out with the family out there. That's what we were searching for by coming here and building this house.
When it comes to your family, and I know that your daughter has come out to your events from time to time, what is it like to take a term in the auto world to have her ride shotgun with you and for her to see the glee on your face as you're working these events?
You know, that's a good question. And actually, both of my kids, my daughter is 19, Olivia, and my son, Lucas, is 16. They both basically grew up in and around Supercross specifically, because I was doing Supercross for 15 years here in the United States, most of it within the Fox family of networks through Speed Channel, Fox Sports, and FS1 and FS2. So literally for my son's entire life, I was the supercross guy here in the US. So he grew up seeing these supercross athletes as not only heroes, but as friends. And my daughter was basically the same way because these athletes watched my kids grow up in the sport. Every time a new season got started, they were a year older and another foot taller. And the friendships kind of continued from there. Of course, that also included NASCAR racing and sprint car racing and all these different forms of motorsport that I've done for 30 plus years now. So for them, these are all different families within the sport of motorsports that they've gotten to know. There's certain guy like Uncle Tony or Uncle Danny, or these legendary drivers that they've gotten to know is more than just superstar athletes who compete behind the wheel or holding on the handlebars, but people who are dear and deep family friends who have real close bonds with our families. So they see them not just at the racetrack, but away from the track and interactions. And, they're as close a family member, a lot of them, is people in our neighborhood.
To share that bond within the sport, it's so cool to hear those familial like ties. And happy to report for you, you're just finishing your pilot season with World Supercross. So excited to, that you're back doing that as one of your main passions, as Ralph Sheheen is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. So you've done so many different type of races and competing with motorbikes and in NASCAR and sprint car. I actually went to a dirt sprint car track in North Carolina, but on the west side of the state, and it was fascinating. I've been to Bowman Gray, which in Winston-Salem. I used to work in Winston-Salem at a local TV station, and every Saturday night, Ralph, we would they had the big event, and we would take the highlights and we'd put them on
Yep.
the local broadcast. But depending upon the race length, depending upon the competitors, how do you judge when to story tell? And that, say there's a longer race and maybe you have more time to throw stuff like that in. What goes into the decision-making process for you when you really get to be that storyteller that you've known to be?
It's very dependent upon the type of motorsport you're calling. If you're doing something like a NASCAR race, it could be 400, 500, or 600 miles in length. You've got 3, 4, 5, 6 hours you're going to be on the air. You got all kinds of time to tell any story you want to tell. You got to pace yourself and not get too far into it too fast. For example, I don't like it when I like to build up a little bit of drama, right? So in Supercross, you build up to the gate drop, and the gate drops, and then I want to lay out and let those engines scream as those guys go sailing off in that first corner. Then let the chaos unfold in that first corner, and then make the next call as they're coming out, right? Who survived the corner? Because you got to let those engines roar. You got to let the fan get up on the seat like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Who's going to crash? Is my guy going to make it through? Not the time to tell the story. Right then, fan wants to see if his guy gets through the corner, right? Do that. Let that all settle. Then let the race go from there. Now you can start, hey, look, Brian's up into second place. By the way, Brian got a new dog this week, and he named him Whole Shot. And what a great name, because he just got one, right?
Wow.
Now you can start working your stories in, sprinkling them through. For the NASCAR race, again, you got 6 hours. If it's the 600 here in Charlotte, for example, you got all day, man. Take your time. Let it breathe. Letting it breathe can be every bit as important as telling a bit of information, whether it's a stat or a good story. Other forms of motorsport where the racing is a little bit quicker, for example, with Supercross, once the race gets started, there's so much passing going on. It's like a knife fight. It's, real thrusting kind of stuff. So it's not a long sit back boxing match type deal. So you have to get your stories in quick, short, and make your point, move on, because there might be another pass coming before you're done. So you really got to kind of find that rhythm to it, no matter what form of motorsport it is. Baseball is a much different event, right? There's so much time in between pitches. You've got a lot of time to talk about what happened and that's why Vin Scully was so great, because he had so many stories and he had all the time in the world to tell them in between pitches. He could talk about what went on in the 30s or the 40s. He lived it.
I think one of the big things that separates you, Ralph, is the placement of those stories. And as you said, knowing when to inject them, knowing when it's the right time. And I think that a lot of us, especially we have a great nugget that maybe we got from somebody we're talking to in the garage, and we want to get that in, and we're so anxious to get that in. But there has to be a level of patience too in the way in which you broadcast, in the sense of waiting for that right time for it to come out. And then to be as focused as you have to be, because this is different than, say, tennis or golf, where you've got, as you said, mass chaos with so many different things happening at once. What are you looking for? Like, as your race starts and your mind is trying to process all of this information, all of these moving parts, where do you find your focus on predominantly when the green flag hits and the race is on?
So I think every broadcaster, at least in motorsports, but I think this carries over in all forms of sport. Everybody has their own thing, right? Their own shtick, if you will, whatever that might be. In racing, for example, some guys are very good with the technical side of the event, talking about the nuts and bolts of the race car, or what the drivers are trying to do. Maybe a guy has a lot of knowledge about driver skill set and what's involved in making passes and that sort of thing, setting it up strategy wise, that sort of stuff. Everybody's going to have their different things. Some guys might be very good at storytelling, so they want to just spend the day weaving those magical nuggets through the broadcast. I consider myself an energy guy. So for me, racing is not brain surgery, man. It's excitement. You're up on that rev limiter the whole time. And so what you get from me is what I'm actually feeling at that time. So that's why I really loved Supercross and sprint car racing, because they're quick burst types of motorsport where the passes are usually extreme and fast. And as soon as one happens, another one comes right after it. So for a guy like me who's really about the energy of the event, I'm right there. I'm up. Oh my gosh, look, here it comes. Bryan to the inside, Bryan to the outside. Bryan wins, that kind of thing. So what you get with me might be fingers on a chalkboard to somebody, but hopefully some folks enjoy that energy and get that energy to draw them into the race. Because what I find is you don't want to be the story. You want to just add to it, right? So I just try to bring that energy level to get you as excited as I am to go, wow, what you're watching is really something special. And what these guys are doing, what these athletes are doing out there on the racetrack is worth paying attention to.
And the relatability, because when you are truly your authentic self, when you're getting excited about a key moment in the race, those who are watching more often than not are feeling what you're feeling. So sure, it's impossible to please everybody, but the vast majority, they love you because they feel that energy, and it's infectious, right? And I think that is another, as we look at what makes you stand out, it's the storytelling, the relatability, and the energy that the crowd and those at home who are watching, they feel. And as you think about the changes in your life from working in different sports or different competitions, to take another term here, Ralph, when you've had to, from a career standpoint, had to go off-roading, when maybe you had a preconceived idea of where it was going, but then you had to make an audible and you had to do a gear shift and it actually worked out okay. Where do you find that has come out in your life?
Supercross is a perfect example for that. I had been doing NASCAR for CBS Sports and TNN, the national network, which was real big back in the day.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of NASCAR between those two networks. So I was doing the Daytona 500 every year on CBS, which was a real thrill. I mean, to me, that was reaching the pinnacle of the industry. I had made it to the very top. Here I am on CBS with Ken Squire and, Ned Jarrett and the gang, and we're doing the Daytona 500 live on CBS. That's That's it. I'm here. I've made it. Right. Well, shortly thereafter, after a few years, there was a big turnover in the NASCAR TV contract. CBS was out, TNN was out, ESPN was out, NBC is in, TNT is in, and Fox is in. At the time, I didn't have a huge relationship yet with Fox, so things were really turning over pretty quick. And now all of a sudden, my NASCAR gig has gone away. And I remember saying to my wife, now what? I was at a real loss because to me at the time, the NASCAR TV gig was the epitome in my industry. So I thought, that's where you've got to be. If you're not doing that, what are you doing? How am I going to take care of the family? Right. Well, shortly thereafter that, the Supercross deal also comes to Fox. And now I'm in the door over there and they're looking around for somebody to do play by play for Supercross. And I'm like, I'll do it. I love that stuff. Like, you're in. 15 years later, I've
Wow.
had the longest run in the history of the sport of Supercross as a play-by-play voice, and it went from Speed Channel to the Fox family, and after Fox, I went over to NBC for a couple of years, and I did that for 2 years on NBC. That eventually went away. Now here I was again feeling rug yanked out from under me when that didn't get renewed, and I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I've been the Supercross guy for 15 years. What's going on now? Now I'm thinking, now I'm done again. Here I am, right? My wife is like, well, remember, door closes, door opens, right? Sure enough, 2 years later, I get the phone call from Australia. Hey, how would you like to tour the world calling Supercross? Are you kidding me? Not only do I get to do this sport that I love again, and I get to do it with my best buddy, Jeff Emig, who was my colleague for 13 of those first 15 years, or 12, I should say, 12 of those first 15 years. But now Jeff and I are going to go around the world, and we're going to do it again for Fox Sports, which is the network family I love the most. I mean, Bryan, it couldn't get any better. Thank you. It was absolute blessing. So yes, there are times in this industry where that rug comes out, but if you hang in there and you fight long enough, sometimes something else comes along.
Metaphorically, I love that story of persistence, Ralph. In that, let's say you're the driver of your own story of where you want to take your career. But I love how you mention your wife, and she sounds like a pretty good crew chief, if I'm not mistaken here. And the way in which you relied on her strength and her belief in you, how would you sum up how much that meant to you when you needed it the most, and where you would be if you didn't have her and those incredible words of encouragement that she was constantly pouring into you?
Couldn't do it without her. Doesn't happen. There's been two women in my life that have helped get me to where I am. First one being my mother, who has passed away. But when I was much younger, teenager, I had this vision in my head. This is what I want to go do, right? Which was insane, right? I mean, come on. You're going to go be a TV guy and you're going to call motorsports. I was like, I'm going to do motorsports, not just a sportscaster, but I'm going to go do motorsports. At the time, there wasn't a lot of motorsports on television. You had ESPN, you had TBS, and you had TNN out there percolating with it a little bit. So it's not like there was this proliferation of motorsports on TV like there is now, where you've got you had Speed Channel for years, it was 24/7. That didn't exist back then. So I was really reaching. ESPN only had one or maybe two networks. They didn't have the 13 or 25 networks that they've got out there now. Streaming didn't exist, right? So, I mean, I was really stretching, thinking I was going to make this happen. But my mother was very supportive. And before I could drive myself to the racetrack, ran me around all the racetracks I could get gigs at as a PA announcer to help, get this stuff going, and then help me get off to college at Chico State to pursue a broadcasting degree. So those were incredible things that she did to get me going, right? And believing in me, and then helping me get to North Carolina and getting this part of the career off and running and supporting me while I was going through the ups and downs in the early stages of my career. Then I meet my wife, we get married, have kids, here we are. Now things are moving, yes, but now come those big problems too, because when those rugs get yanked out now, they're much bigger rugs with a much harder fall, right? And a much bigger impact because it really impacts the cash flow, obviously, coming into the family and feeding the family, putting clothes on the kids, all the stuff that comes with it. And if you don't have a wife that supports you and believes in you,
Yeah.
next thing you know, you're working Walmart because you got to make something happen, right? But she would just always has always been there and just stay with it, keep going, you'll get there. And here we are, we've made it through.
Ralph, you have some very empowering women in your life, and I love that.
No,
I,
and they say, Brian, that guys tend to marry somebody similar to their mom a lot of times, and
yeah,
girls end up marrying somebody who's very similar to their dad in a lot of ways. Well, my wife and my mom definitely have a lot of the same characteristics. Strong women, independent women, both great cooks, and for some reason they both love me.
well, that's pretty easy to do considering how big your fan club is. Ralph, and I'm part of it. Ralph Sheheen is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. It was so interesting. So you're talking about the early days and you're trying to find tracks to be a PA announcer. Just get your name out there and get that experience early on. How would you train your brain to announce motor sports events when you weren't on the track? Like, what would you do when you weren't there to just sort of mentally get yourself in that mindset?
I think all sportscasters were huge sports fans, period, right? Some guys maybe like just one avenue of sport. Maybe you're just a baseball guy or a basketball or a football guy, whatever it might be. I loved everything. I watched all forms of sport. I loved it all. But racing was the one that really got inside and got the blood flowing, right? So I ate up everything I get my hands on, read everything, watched everything, went to any and every race I could go to. I was not the guy that sat there with the microphone and watched the races on TV with the volume down and called them. I didn't do that. I don't know. I know a lot of guys that have done that. For some reason, I just didn't do that. But I thought about a lot about why I wanted to do it and what I loved about it, why it intrigued me. And so maybe I was kind of making plans in my head without even really realizing it. And a lot of it has been baptism by fire, which I think ultimately is how you have to do it in this career. I went and got a 4-year degree college in broadcasting, but you know what? That really didn't teach me anything. And it's not that Chico State wasn't a great school, it's a fantastic broadcasting school. But ultimately, you're holding the microphone, the red light goes on, everything you learned in college goes out the window. You're fully exposed. What are you going to do? You're going to sink or you're going to swim. So for me, I think it was that the internships that I got in college that I did were a big help, getting a lot of experience that way. And then I was actively pursuing PA announcing jobs as soon as I got into college.
Wow.
I mean, I was doing them as fast as I could get them. I would take the Friday Sacramento Bee. I grew up in Sacramento, California. I take the Friday Sacramento Bee, and they would always list in the back of the sports section all the races that were running on the given weekend, right? Which tracks and where they were at. I would take that list of all those racetracks, go to the phone book. All right, Placerville Speedway, here's their number. Call those guys. Hey, do you need a PA announcer? No, okay. Auburn Speedway. Hey, you need a PA announcer? You do? Great. Now I'm booked for Friday night. Got my Friday night gig, Auburn Speedway. I was doing Speedway motorcycles every Friday night. Then I called All American Speedway in Roseville, California, just outside of Sacramento. They ran NASCAR weekly stock car races on Saturday night. Got that gig. Now I got Friday and I got Saturday. Sunday was always a hodgepodge, whatever was going on in the area. Might be a monster truck show or a mud bog or NASCAR racing, whatever it was, I was doing those, right? On Monday, I stumbled upon ladies' fashion shows at a restaurant bar, and I got that gig. So I had 4 paid gigs on a microphone every week. And that was really where I learned the craft of what I was doing. And the most important one of all was the fashion shows, because I knew nothing about what I was doing. So think about this, Brian. You're doing a tennis match and everything goes great. All of a sudden, weather comes in because tennis is always in beautiful tropical locations. I know you're you're down there with the palm trees and the fruity drinks. You're good to go. But you get bad weather comes in, courts are washed out. Now what do? You're still on the air. You got to fill 3 hours. Producer eventually runs out of every feature piece they've done before they go to alternate programming. You still have to fill time. You got to know how to tap dance, right? How to make things interesting to keep the viewer engaged. Same thing in racing. What if a guy knocks the fence down or there's a bad crash or the weather comes through? And we've all experienced it. And you've got to be able to keep this thing going. Those fashion shows taught me that because I knew nothing about ladies' fashion. But I had to keep the crowd entertained on the microphone while this was all going on every Monday night for 4 hours. So I learned real quick how to tap dance and say anything I could think of to keep the crowd engaged on what was going on with the models on the show floor, right? So whenever a young person comes up to me and they say, hey, how do I get your job? I say, well, what do you want to do? And they'll say, I want to go do racing. I go, great, go do volleyball. For that very reason, go do something you know nothing about. Can you get a boxing match? Great, go do that, because it's going to force you to learn what I just talked about, how to dance on your feet, keep the show moving, and you will be a better race commentator because you did that volleyball match.
The idea of being good at improvisation, that has to be at your core what's shown time and time again to be one of your best characteristics. And to hear where it came from in a place I'd never would have foreseen, but I love that mentality, because then I would think, Ralph, if you can do that, then it's like you could do anything, especially with what you want to do. It's sort of like, when a batter is on deck and they put the added weight on the bat, and then they take that off and they go to the dish and they get ready to take on the pitcher, and it just feels so much easier to swing that bat. And the wittiness for you has to, where would you rate that? Because at the top for me is where I see it, but over these early times that you're talking about to now, it's clear and apparent that's why, people love to hire you and bring you on.
I think it has gotten me further in my career than anything else I've ever done. Because again, like you said, all that tap dancing allows you to get in situations where no matter what's going on, you're going to survive. You've done a lot of live sports. When things go bad is when you have to be your best, right? Anybody can do a broadcast that goes smooth, right? Anybody at this level is a trained professional. Smooth broadcast, anybody can do that. What happens when things go really bad, whatever it is? Tape machines are bad in the TV truck, equipment's failing, weather's bad, whatever it might be, and the producer's in your ear, he's having a really bad day. Can you bail that guy out? You can bail him out and keep the show smooth, and nobody at home knows the producer's having a bad day. He's going to love you, and you're going to get hired again.
Well, it's like winning a locker room, to use another sports cliche, and it's winning over a production truck and everybody who's working on a broadcast. When you can do that, and I think, and I know you too, it's like you don't point fingers. People obviously see what's going on, but it's like you want them to think that there's nothing happening as much as possible, and the people around you appreciate that. And you know what? As we wrap up this conversation, Ralph, it's, as you said, it's never a bad day when you know that Ralph Sheheen is part of a motorsports broadcast. And my day, I think, has been enriched because of this conversation, in a sense that I know there's a lot of people out there who know you, Ralph, who follow you, but I have a feeling that they're going to learn something new about you. And that is what it means to me to have these conversations, is learn something about you and my guests that maybe a lot of people don't know. And I love that you are so open to sharing that side with you.
Well, I appreciate that, Brian. You ask great questions, and that's a challenging part of being a good interviewer, which you obviously are. Not many people find ways of getting that stuff pulled out, but you did a great job of that. Brought me into areas I have never talked about on before.
Well, you know what? We're going to do this in person one time. Next time you're in the SoCal area, I want to go check out your work. We're going to make it happen. And I just so grateful and appreciative of your time here. Ralph Sheheen, you can follow him all over the place. World Supercross, the list goes on. 2023 is around the corner, and you're going to be seeing a lot of him on your TV screen. I'm Bryan Fenley with Fox Sports Radio and Tennis Channel. Ralph, thanks so much, man. I had a blast doing this with you.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it. Let's not make it 6 months again before we do it again.